begin? This is it's not an easy topic. This is a really, this is a very emotional, for me, this, particularly dealing with the issue of police brutality. Again, it's something that I've been through twice. So for me, this is a very personal thing. But I thought I would take a moment and clarify a little bit further what I had mentioned in the previous video, and that is, this question of so-called conservatism, right? Like I'm not an overtly political person, and as I've made in statements before, I'm much more of a moralist and a theist, obviously as a Muslim, right? Than than anything else. But I want to delve or dive a little bit further on this notion of so-called black on black crime, because I think the reason why many people get incensed, and rightly so, when there is an incident of non-black on black crime, it largely seems, particularly, and it seems to only come from, so-called conservatives, you don't really have, liberals making this argument, is that the way that I see it with the conservative argument of bringing this up, this is like a derailment, right? And essentially, if I can try to articulate this the right way, the big issue of bringing up the issue of black on black crime in a moment where there is a non-black on black crime, like in this case with George Floyd in Minnesota, or this long string of right, is that one, there's a presumption of guilt, and that somewhere or another this was brought upon by the perpetrator, or rather by the victim, that the crime was perpetrated almost like as a matter of fate, or they brought this upon themselves, right? It's clear that you can see in the 9 minutes, right, of video in the case of George Floyd, that this man should, theological arguments of qadr aside, right, this man should still be with us. And even if the person had resisted arrest, resisting arrest is not a call for execution, right? Because he was executed on the spot. And therefore, getting to this issue of the conservative voice invoking black on black crime, is that this is so hard to put a finger on. One of the main issues of of invoking the black on black crime clause when we have one of these situations is that it is reliant upon a kind of neo-eugenics, where instead of before the deficiency being a genetic one, now it is a cultural one. But the result is the same, where the crime that was perpetrated is justifiable. The crime that is perpetrated is somehow justifiable. This is horrible. And therefore, and this is my biggest issue, almost as the reverse of what I was saying in the video before, we only seem to care about, right, the black community only seems to care about so-called Black Lives Matter issues, right, is when the perpetrator is white. My issue with the conservatives, and including the vast majority of black conservatives that I have observed thus far, is that they only seem to care about black on black crime when the crime being perpetrated is by a white person. And to me, this is just another shade of the underbelly of the idolatry and the oppression that is white supremacy, right? It's this is so this is one reason why I have major issues with a lot of traditional black conservatism as a whole. That's why I have a hard time comfortably being labeled a conservative, because while I like a sort of Venn diagram, sure, there's some things that I may overlap with them on, say like stances on homosexuality, stances on abortion, and other things, right? And there'll be other areas that there absolutely won't be any overlap. So my biggest issue is that if invoking the black on black crime quote in that moment is just as hypocritical to me as black folks only caring about a white perpetrator committing something, right? We still, like, the elephant in the room that is being denied by the rank and file black community, by the conservative community, by the black conservative community, right? Like, the big elephant in the room is the valuing of black life, right? The valuing of black life. To me, this is the big elephant in the room that nobody wants to touch. And therefore, everybody has their kind of foxtrot, everybody has their dance, everybody has their two-step that they do, whether their dance partner is a white antagonist, or a black conservative as their dance partner. Everybody's got a kind of like their two-step, and therefore everybody's dancing around the major issue of value of black life. And that's why, for me, I cannot embrace the popular liberal viewpoint on this issue, because in the end, it doesn't really value black life. It only values it in the shadow, kind of like me sitting underneath this light right now. Like, it only values it underneath the spotlight or the shade that whiteness throws upon it, right? And conversely, black conservatives only seem to invoke the black on black, statistic or derailment, right? When there's a white perpetrator. When you have those, when you don't have a white perpetrator, by and large, they're also quite silent. And so I wanted to clarify, in my last video, I want people to understand I am not invoking the classic black conservative, well, what about black on black? No, like, for me, again, as a Muslim, the preservation of life is paramount. And historically, in the West, and more particular in America, black life has been incredibly undervalued by everybody, white, black, and otherwise. And therefore, this becomes a theist issue of the preservation of life. Particularly that, in this part of the world, black life has unquestionably been a target of oppression and brutality. And I think that another also fair criticism of conservatism, white or black, is that it is all too quick to dismiss history as still playing a role in current times. That it wants to immediately, it's like a red card, right? If there's any invoking of history and its impact on the present, it's like, boom, a red card, and just completely ejected out of the game, right? This is one of my big issues with conservatism as a whole, and particularly black conservatism, that it doesn't want to acknowledge that history is not just in the past; it's still having an impact on the present. Um, and you can even step outside the realm of police brutality in the black community to see, like, just look at home ownership in America. History continues to substantially negatively impact the black community, that started in practices of redlining and going all the way up into the present. And I've spoken about this before several times, and I recommend you. There's a book called The Color of Money. If you haven't read it, it's a really incredible book. It's extraordinarily well researched by, I think she's Iran. I think she's an Iranian American academic, and the name is escaping me at the moment. But check out her book. I mean, incredibly well researched. Or Thomas Sugrew's book about the origin of the urban crisis, right? That shows that history is still very much impacting. Now, yes, it's true. Um, Even though history is impacting the present, history is not the present, meaning that what happened during Jim Crow, like, we are not currently in Jim Crow. And therefore we shouldn't go to absurdities about the impact, but we also equally shouldn't go to absurdities in dismissing it, which I think all too often happens. And perhaps this again is the idiocy of the dichotomy that we are forced to have to inhabit. That either you have the liberal idiocy that like, we're basically still in Jim Crow, right? We have no agency as black people. We are victims and perpetrating victimology and so on and so on. This is my issue with coming from the left, from the liberal camp. But then the conservative camp is just as equally absurd in that, well, history's all done now. We're at post-history. It's very amazing the conservatives who like to champion themselves as the standard bearers of tradition are in many ways very postmodern when it comes to issues of race. Meaning, postmodern meaning what? Like, history's over now. We're beyond history. We're beyond any of its effects, and so on and so on. And I find that both, again, general conservatism and black conservatism both tend to be, when it comes to the topic of race, they tend to be quite postmodern, right? And that's why I wanted to just clarify a few things in here. I am not evoking black on black crime at a time where, look, it would take one firing brain cell to come to a conclusion that we have a particular issue of police brutality against the black community, and in particular against black men. This is not arguable. This is beyond arguing, right? The only question is to what extent, right? But it's beyond the pale of argument. That we have a problem of police brutality, period, in this country. We have, like this, like the technique. I mean, this is the part that also needs to get, that needs to be drawn out. And this is where I don't know if I made my point in the last video. This is my real issue, right? That liberalism never gets to is being able to really make those lasting changes, because it's really only about victimology and crying and emotionalism. It doesn't really, like, why are police departments training people? Because as we've seen, how many videos have we seen of people where an officer is putting his knee on somebody's neck? That maneuver needs to go, right? And it will never be banished through any liberal means, and I don't think it'll be banished through any conservative, because again, American conservatism, white or black, is so completely infatuated and head over heels with law enforcement, with might is right. Forget about it. Even though they claim to be the community of Jesus and Christianity, it doesn't look like any Christianity that I recognize, and I say that as a Muslim. But equally, liberals are just as much to blame for, if we were to be generous, being ineffective. And if we're probably more honest, they've been in some kind of collusion with the powers that be to allow this to continue to perpetrate, right? Because this isn't the first time we've seen this. So we have a problem in America with violence, killing, right? And then underneath that very general problem of violence and killing, we have a particular issue in the black community, some of which is non-black actors against black victims, and some is black actors against black victims. And we don't need to, maybe to bring this little thing to a swift conclusion, we no longer have to pick and choose. We don't have to be in the liberal camp. We don't have to be in the conservative camp. We don't have to pick some side here. We should be on the entire issue, not a side of the issue. We need to tackle this thing full and head on. And therefore, that's why I will not allow myself to be drug into either liberal or conservative tropes. So, inshallah, I hope this explains a little bit better what I was trying to say in that first video, inshallah. And may Allah give the family of Mr. Floyd, may He give them hidayah, may He give them rahmah, may He give them mercy and clemency, and and may He give them adl, may He give them justice, inshallah. And we all know that justice will be served on that one day, of which there will be no soul will be able to avail one of another, and everybody will be paid for what they did. So وصلي وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين والسلام عليكم.